think I
It's
hear
kind
it.
of funny, actually.
Okay, yeah, audio checks are good. So we are live, Andrew.
Hello.
All right. So today we have a special guest, a very close friend, and also my fraternity brother. And how long have we known each other actually? Since
Since January of 2008.
12 years. Yeah, it's been a long time.
It's
And
been a while. You know why I know this is because on Facebook, we're still in a civil union.
oh, didn't we have a 10-year anniversary recently or somewhere like that? Or 12 year? 10 year?
2 years ago.
Oh, yeah. I'm super outdated. Yeah, we've stuck through it for a long time.
Somehow we've put up with each other's BS. Yes.
I
It's
and
been a while.
and we've made it through. Okay. So we've actually talked about doing this for quite a long time, like specifically talking about, your medical experiences. I don't know for how long, maybe 2 years now. We've threw this idea around.
Yeah.
And we're finally doing it today, but much, much less formal. So super informal, just kind of catching up, which I'm trying to do with all my friends. So both Andrew and I are off today, so we're just hanging out, catching up. But let's see. I think the way we're gonna structure this, just so the audience knows, is kind of like use your milestones professionally to guide us in our conversations, and kind of catch up on what happened during those milestones. Because I feel as though, especially with you, we catch up every now and then, but I never knew all the details between after we graduated college and where you are now. So we can start there, but um, let's start with undergrad, right? So starting with undergrad, you knew you've always wanted to go to medical school. Is that right?
I did not,
Oh, you did not.
actually.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess I maybe before that. So I'm Andrew. Um,
Forgot to introduce you.
yes. Been Brian's friend for a long time, unfortunately. And I'm currently in residency as a DO. So and so yeah, so Brian and I before right before jumping on, we're talking about whether like how to kind of what we want to talk about, and I guess he wants to focus on me somehow. So in undergrad, God, so graduated in 2011, right? When
You
did you graduate?
you're old. I'm not gonna say when I graduated, but you're old. I
This
I
is not fair. This is
I
not what we talked about. This is supposed to be equal.
2 years before you. 2009 is when I graduated.
Yeah, I always thought I was older than you, but whatever.
Really?
Um,
Okay, go on.
so 2011, at the time, I did not think that I would be going to medical school.
Hmm.
But uh, as all good Asian parents are, they pushed me in that direction. And so even though I didn't want to do it, I ended up being a pre-med student and took all the pre-med courses um, because I thought, even though I don't want to do it, I should leave the option open. Um,
Wait, can you,
and
can you pause for a second? I feel as though I never knew that. I've always thought you were pre-med since the beginning because you took all the pre-med courses. But can I ask a quick question? If it wasn't
sure.
pre-med, what did you think about?
So I'm a psychology major. And I always thought that I would do something along those lines of like being a psychologist, a therapist, something like that. I didn't land very far.
Hmm.
Currently I'm in psychiatry residency. So I work with psychologists all the time, but I'm just not one of them. Um, so I was a psychology major. I also majored in sociology. I picked that up. I really didn't start becoming a pre-med student seriously until I think the end of my first year.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of that was just because I didn't really think that I would cut it. I didn't think that I would be a good uh, at like chemistry, organic chemistry, biochemistry. I hated chemistry. And that's obviously a big part of the pre-med track. So, but one day I thought to myself, I think you might have been there. We were just sitting around like talking out loud, and I was like, you know what? Why don't I just give it a shot? Like, if I can make it through chemistry, why don't I just do it? If I don't, I don't, but at least give it a shot. So I did. Signed up for pre-med classes um, on top of my double major, and so throughout college, it was always this question of whether or not med school or doing medicine would be right for me. Um,
Hmm.
so that was my undergrad life,
By
and of
the
course,
way, Andrew's being very modest because this guy did very well in undergrad. But keep going.
I don't think I did that great,
He
but
did very well in some of those very difficult courses. But keep going. Keep going.
yeah. So, you know, as far as medicine goes, the question that I had in undergrad was always whether or not this is right for me. Whether or not the coursework was good for me, whether or not I cared about the sciences enough to keep going with it. It eventually just became one of those like I'm doing it. I might as well just keep going and just see where it goes. I passed Chem one, passed Chem two, um, and then it just kept snowballing from there. Um, and then I still, even after I was nearing the end of my undergrad years, wasn't really sure if I wanted to do med school. And so what I did was, and that's I think something that you want to touch on as well, but I guess this kind of goes into it, was um, if medicine, the field itself, not just the coursework, was right for me. And so I actually signed up at a local community college to do EMT. Um, so I'd be doing my pre-med double major during the day. I'd be going to EMT coursework at night.
When was
And
this?
this was in my either end of junior year or like beginning of senior year.
Okay. Yeah, this is where the memory gets a little fuzzy because I was at
You
farm
probably you
school.
probably left already. Yeah.
I mean, I was still UF, but like this is where I mean, yeah. Anyways, this is where it's a little fuzzy. So I did not know you were doing that. So EMT at night, and what kind of coursework is that like?
So it's not terrible. At the time when I did it, I don't know if it's different now. We had to take a half a semester of first responder course, which is like every single like public service type person, like I think police officers, EMTs, like pretty much anyone that works in the public sector will have to take that just to get like a basic certificate that says that you can do whatever. I don't even remember what it is now. Um, and so that was half a semester, and it was fairly simple compared to uh, at least the science courses that I took at UF. But EMT was one semester after that, like a whole semester. And that was pretty tough, at least in terms of time commitment. So that was, I think if I remember correctly, like 3 or 4 days a week from 6 p.m. to I think 9 or 10 p.m.
Every day?
Like three or 4 days a week, I think.
Is that and does that just didactic work or was there like also like hands-on practice or shadowing?
One of those days would be like didactic, no, like hands-on, like it's like lab work, but really it's like a simulator course
Okay.
where it's like you go into this room and they have like dummies and you're supposed to practice your skills, like you know, which I thought was kind of odd because we didn't really do that many skills as an EMT basic, but like shoving in like airways and things like that. So, um, but a lot of it was also just how do you take a how do you take vitals? You know, how
Oh,
do you put a blood pressure cuff on someone's arm, and how do you listen like auscultate the blood pressure and things like that.
okay. I'm gonna ask two questions here because I just don't know. One is like, is EMT a common thing that pre-med students usually tackle on? Like a lot of the pre-med students I usually know would do research or shadow at a hospital as a scribe. but I've never really heard of EMT as a common thing. So that's one question. The second question is, what's the duration of the total training? Like, what does that usually look like? Is it completed over a year, 2 years, number of credit hours? Like, what is that? So two questions.
EMT was just a semester.
Mm,
Um, the first responder, like I said, was half a semester before that. So it's 1.5 semesters. If I remember correctly, I don't think it was a year.
okay.
I might be wrong, but I think it was like a semester and a half for in total. Um, most med students, I don't think would do something like that because it costs money and takes time and coursework, and you have to get, it's basically taking college courses and then
Oh,
spending money to do it.
yeah.
So it's not the cheap route. But one of the reasons why I thought about doing it, and I was thinking about this the other day, is because it was a conversation that we had actually a long time ago. And you were saying at that time, well, maybe you're like, maybe I want to go to med school after farm school. And I was like, man, you're just you just want to punish yourself.
Yeah, that's funny. Okay, keep going.
And so, one of the things that you said was like, well, the thing is, I don't know if I could withstand like blood and stuff like that. And truthfully, I didn't know if I could either.
Hmm.
And so I was like, well, one of the ways that I could find out is just to be an EMT. Um,
That's so interesting. That's really one of the reasons why.
yeah, I mean, I wanted to see if I could do it.
And what would you say now? Is EMT something you like a path? You think that's like it was worthwhile to pursue that?
I think it was. I don't think it necessarily lent itself to like excelling in med school necessarily.
Hmm. Okay.
Uh, but I think that it's like valuable experience to have, you know, if nothing else, because I now understand a little bit more about, what non-physician healthcare workers do, um, which I think is something that's probably missing in a lot of, um, I don't know, like what people don't really think about when they're physicians. For us, it's kind of like we say something or we put something into the computer, and it just we just expect it to get done. And so, one of the things that I kind of think about is, well, that's not that simple. You have to look at how that gets done and who's doing it and what they have to go through in order to get your orders completed. So I mean, I think more in that sense, it's like interesting. Or a lot of times healthcare workers, we kind of like in a fun way like to bash on each other, like, oh, like those group of people don't do this, and night shift bashes on day shift, and day shift bashes on night shift. But it's interesting when I've been in those shoes and I can see like why certain things don't get done a certain way that you expect it to. It's because there's different challenges that everyone has to face, um, depending on what role they play.
Hmm.
So,
That's a very interesting perspective. So there is, in some ways, some benefit of knowing, what else goes on when you're not in a physician role, because that's important because, care is complex and there are many different players in that role.
right.
Okay, well, why don't we move on to the next part where it's like you graduate from college and you didn't go to med school right away. And if
Nope.
I recall, you actually worked as an EMT for like a year or 2 years.
So, no, I actually did not.
Oh, okay.
So I got my EMT certification, graduated from both undergrad and EMT school, but I never actually worked as an EMT.
Oh,
Um, really thought about it, but unfortunately, at least in Florida and around the places where I live, EMT basic, which is the certification that we get, that I got, you don't really do a whole lot unless you're also a firefighter, and I'm not about to be a firefighter. I just don't have that in me. Um, and so a lot of EMT basics, they do transport work. So like, transporting a patient from a nursing home to a hospital or from, rehab to a nursing home or things like that, which is good work. But I didn't really know if I wanted to pursue that. And actually, right out of college, I was offered a job as a social worker in a forensic psychiatric facility, which is, to break that down, one of my coworkers back then said that we work with the criminally insane.
Okay.
So, people who um, were not guilty by reason of insanity, who had been in jail, and who had been good, for lack of better words. They've been stable on their medications. They've had good behavior in jail. And then we would kind of pluck them out of jail and say, the jail isn't the right place for you. What you need is psychiatric care. And you're stable enough to not have to be constantly guarded 24 hours a day by like corrections officers. You can be in a psychiatric facility where you can eat, sleep, have a little bit more freedom, engage in therapy, things like that. And so I was their social worker when they lived at those facilities.
Can we dive into the memories slowly coming back now. It's been so long. Can we dive into why you chose? Because like you weren't just offered a job, you applied, right?
Yeah.
Like how why did you pursue that route? Like what was going through your mind in versus like applying to medical school
Uh,
or going
well,
down a
so
different path?
right, and so I still wanted to see if I was still on this like I wanted to be a psychologist. I wanted to be a therapist.
Hmm.
I wanted to do and social work was kind of like on that same path. Um, I still really didn't want to do med school. Uh, I can't remember why at that time that I didn't think about it because I enjoyed doing EMT work. I thought it was really interesting. Um, in the few, I can't really say that I did it much in the few like shifts that I had to do to get through school. I enjoyed it. And then, volunteering in a hospital and things like that, I enjoyed that as well. Um, but I thought, I liked, therapy more. I liked talking to people. I liked getting to know them. I liked, helping them out on a more social level. Um, and so that's kind of why I pursued more of a psychology route rather than a medical route. Um, so yeah, that's how I ended up there.
Okay.
Um,
And that
and
was 2 years, 1 year?
I actually really only stayed at that job for 6 months.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So what was
because at the end of those 6 months, I decided, you know what, I should try medical school.
okay. So walk me through that. So what does you thinking that you're ready for medical school entail? Did you like start jumping into MCATs? Did you start reading student doctor forums? Like what did you do to, I guess, start your path to medical school?
Well, first of all, student doctor forum is
You're not a
it's
fan?
a it's a good place and a very bad place, like simultaneously.
Okay, why I think I know what you're gonna get at, but why is that?
I mean, it's like the rest of the internet. If YouTube comment sections, just imagine that, but like with a bunch of people that are basically trying to outsmart each other to say how cool they are that they can get into med school. Um, it's a competition, and it can be very informative and it can be very off putting. So I don't think that's necessarily a good place for people to find what they want to find unless they just ignore all the BS on there. Um, and I say that because I attempted to apply to med school over the course of what 2 years, and I never really thought that I was a good applicant to go
Hmm.
to med school. I don't know if part of that was just because student doctor forums. I mean, you can't blame it all on them, but I think there's a good chunk that's also just you know probably like lack of self-esteem. I don't know, like lack of self-confidence. I kept thinking. I mean, this is a common theme now. It's like, um, can I make it through science classes? Can I make it into being in the medical field? That's what drove me to do EMT. And now it's like, can I really become a good applicant to go to medical school? Do I really meet those benchmarks? Do I deserve that kind of do I can I do it really is what it comes down to.
Okay.
And
We obviously know you did, so fun,
right.
right? But so what did you do then to prepare for med school?
Um,
Like at the end of that 6 months, like what are
yeah. So at the end of that 6 months, I also took my EMT licensing.
hmm,
That was just kind of a side thing because I was like, if I'm going to quit my job, which I did, I quit my social work job, and I said, if I'm going to really be serious about pursuing this med school thing, maybe I should finally sit down and get licensed for my EMT job or for my EMT stuff. And I did, I got licensed, but then I never really took on a job. I thought I would do part time, and finding those were really hard at the time. It was kind of a saturated market. Um, and so really I did all the other requirements that, most people, if they wanted to go to med school, they should have been doing that since like, at the latest, like second year of undergrad. So now I had to restudy all the science coursework that I had forgotten, um, and get in contact with hospitals and doctors so that I could
could you,
volunteer.
and I don't mean to interrupt, can you list like some of the key things that you did during that time? Because you quit your job, you got licensed, and what are the things you did? Sounds like you did some refreshers on courses, you contacted doctors and hospitals. Like, what are some of those key things that you did?
Right. So basically, what I was trying to do was fulfill all the requirements for a med school application.
Okay.
So, you need, and the biggest one is passing the MCAT, and not just passing it, but doing well as you can on the MCAT.
What is
And
doing well?
that's no easy task.
Back
Back in
then.
the
Yeah.
back then, the MCAT was scored out of a 45, um, with three sections: verbal, I think it was science and something else, math, maybe. No, I don't remember. Um, and each section was 15 points. If Oh, and there's a writing section too. But that, like, nobody really, as long as you could write fairly decently, they really didn't care too much. And Basically, my target score was to get a 30. It seems like if you got a 30, you'd do decently well. If you got a 35, you would do pretty damn well. And if you could get 40 and above, I mean, the doors were open for wherever you wanted to go. I mean, that was the mentality that I had at the time. Right or wrong, I don't know. Um, and so that was difficult. I mean, that's basically, forget all the GPA and the coursework and things like that. Like that was what you were measured by as an applicant.
Is that what you focused on too? Like
That's
primarily?
what I focused on. So
Hmm.
um, the reason why it took me 2 years to get into med school is because I took the MCAT 3 times.
Oh,
Yeah, and so I took it the first time, didn't do so hot. Took it the second time, kind of scored basically the same as my first. Um, and then I realized that whatever I was doing wasn't working. So I ended up signing up for like one of those Princeton Review or
hmm.
Kaplan courses, whatever, like refresher. Because by then I was like, you know, a year and a half out of school. But then like some of those chemistry courses I had taken, like
Long
freshman,
time.
sophomore
Yeah.
year. So that was like even longer than that I had already forgotten everything. So I was like, maybe it's time I got professional help to reteach me everything that I'm supposed to know.
I forgot that you went through all of this. I mean, like, as you bring it up, I know we've talked about this. By the way, there's a comment left by Chris saying SDN is seriously one of the most toxic places, specifically for pharmacy. It's odd how little people talk about that aspect. Yeah, it's interesting. I remember being so depressed seeing how intelligent some of my colleagues are because of those insane GPAs, the research, the leadership positions. So definitely agree. But I love to scour SDN. I don't know why. It's just an interesting
I
place to
I
be.
think it's interesting to look back at it now. Like I haven't really done it much, but I sort of think about it. Um, and it's just like, man, all that stuff was just like it's it's BS. Like, I mean, not entirely. There are very, very brilliant people out there, and I'm sure a lot of those people who post on there probably are very brilliant. Um, but that's not necessary to get into like farm school or dental school or med school.
Yeah.
It's good if you can do it, um, but it's not like you have to do those things otherwise. Like, there's
I I think for me, what I really liked about SDN at least is that for my residency interviews, because it's anonymous, a lot of people talked about some of the things they asked on residency interviews, and it was very specific to institutions, and it helped prepare a little bit. And then when I was thinking about changing careers, like looking at med school, farm to med, people talked about it because everyone has different experiences and stories to
right.
share. So I thought
Right.
it
So
was
if
cool
you
to see
go
that.
on there looking for a specific thing, and I think especially if you go on there after you've already gotten into whatever school you want to, and you're looking at like others, like, I use SDN for when I was looking into residency.
Oh, you did.
It's a completely different place when you're doing that.
At,
Or like, once I already completed my application and I was applying to schools, and now I'm looking at SDN for, what's this school versus that school? What do these students at this school have to say about that school versus these students at this school have to say about that school? At that point, it's a completely different ball game. People are more honest, I think,
mhm.
to some degree, like, oh, my school sucks or my school is great. They don't really, you're not there anymore to compare yourself to brilliant people who are getting, 43 on their MCAT and having like 12 publications before applying into med school. Like, you're already past that. You've already applied. What's done is done. You're now looking at what's my best choice out of the choices that I'm offered. You know what
You,
I'm saying?
but wouldn't you also be stressing about your step one scores at that time? Anyway, I guess
Not
we can go into that in a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a little later on. At this point, like, you got to compartmentalize when you're doing the medical track. You know, First
Yeah,
step is just to get into med school.
yeah.
That's before anything else. You got to do that.
So let's go back to that. Let's fast forward a little bit to your third attempt at the MCAT. You applied that year, and like, what was that like applying to med schools in terms of like, where did you, not necessarily where, but like, what was going through your mind? Did you want to apply to everywhere? Did you apply to a lot of schools? Did you want to leave Florida? Like, what was going through your mind at that time?
So, lots of terrible thoughts were going through my mind at the time. I was a non-traditional student at that point. I had been out of school. I had taken the MCAT multiple times, and they see every time that you take the MCAT. Um, and, of course, I did not stack up to these like brilliant SDN shit posters, for lack of better words. Um, and so, I was going, to me, it was like everything was riding on me getting into med school at that point. Because I'd been out of a job too. Thankfully, my parents were okay with me coming back home and basically being a bum for those 2 years, which, most people are not that lucky. I was very, very lucky to have that. Um, and they were more or less okay with it. But it was a lot of pressure that I put on myself, mostly because at that time I was like, the third MCAT, that's the last MCAT. I told myself that.
Mhm.
If this MCAT score isn't good enough, and if I apply with this MCAT score and I don't get into med school, I'm not applying anymore. That's what I told myself. Because at that time I was like, I've been out of work for 2 years. I've been living at home for 2 years. I need to move on with my life, whether that's medicine or not. And so, it was a very tough time for me. Um,
And this was 2011.
this was 2012 to 2014.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
I was trying to think where I was in life too. Trying to remember where that was and why I don't remember some of these memories. I think these memories are a little less vivid. That was when I started my residency and I was just like super busy. Okay, so it was I did not know it was that difficult of a time. It sounds like it really was and it makes sense. But you did ultimately get accepted, which is
I
super awesome.
I did. I applied. So to answer your earlier question, I applied very far and wide.
Mm,
I knew that at that point, I was an acceptable applicant, but I was realistic with myself, knowing that I wasn't a stellar applicant. And so I would apply everywhere. I did DO, I did MD. Um, I did get accepted into both. Ultimately, I chose DO. Don't ask me why. Um,
okay.
no, I'm just kidding. You can ask me why. But yeah, so I mean,
We're,
for lack of better words, I shoot my shot and went far and wide, and it landed somewhere, and that's where I went.
were all the schools that you got accepted to in Florida?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's good.
Well, it was also so I don't actually know how many more schools I would have gotten accepted into, because once I got accepted into, you know, the three or four schools that I got accepted into in Florida,
You rescinded?
I I canceled all my other applications out of state.
Huh.
Places like Hawaii or Alaska. Like I'm like, if I'm gonna stay in Florida, I might as
I
well
mean, you
stay in
probably would have
Florida.
gotten like Harvard or Yale.
Oh yeah, for
Yeah,
sure,
exactly. So
for sure.
but it's too expensive, so it makes sense to stay in Florida. Smart guy.
So you know, I was joking earlier about don't ask me why I applied or why I went to DO school, but that's one of the reasons why I went to DO school, because it was cheap.
It's cheap. I thought DO school was still expensive. No?
The one that I went to is cheap. So
Well, I guess like so. I have no idea. I usually think of like medical school in general is 50,000 a year, and this is like years ago. So what is the average cost per year for medical MD versus DO?
I don't recall what the cost was for MD schools, but I think they're generally probably a little bit lower because a lot of them are state schools. DO schools are generally private schools. And so comparing the two DO schools that I got into, the one that I chose was about half as much as the other one that I got accepted into.
That's a
Um,
lot.
it is a lot. So
That
that's ultimately why I ended up choosing to go to that one. Um,
wow. Okay. That's yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Well, so you got accepted. Maybe we'll dive into that in just a second. We'll just read the comment from Chris, the next one. I'm speaking more towards the residency job market aspect of SDN. The negative-minded people are not entirely wrong in their content, but the attitude and language is quite poor.
absolutely agree. Absolutely agree.
I don't remember the residency market. I think I have mixed feelings on that part because I remember preparing for residencies. Like I have no idea what medical residencies were like the what they were saying. But I know for pharmacy residencies, I just remember everyone posting was super stellar. The thing that helped me with SDN, maybe this is why I liked it so much, is because I didn't match for residency and I was in the scramble. And there was a thread about pharmacy students who were scrambling, and all we were doing was supporting each other. Like literally every single day, we were like, "How are you guys doing? Are you doing okay? Did you get any new interviews in the scramble?" Like I found it so supportive.
Right. I think that's great.
Is
I
that not the
think
same for medicine?
I think the difference may be, and correct me if I'm wrong, you don't need a residency for pharmacy. You need a residency for medical school.
Yep.
And so the pressure is very, very high. And not only is it, I don't know how many different types of residency there are for pharmacy. I'm sure there's more than one at least. Um, but residency is tied to in medicine. Residency is tied to your specialty for the pretty much for the remainder of your career. No one's really going to be crazy enough to switch mid career to do something else because that entails going into residence a different residency for 3 or 4 or 5 years. Some people do, and don't get me wrong, there are people who are like that, but it's a huge commitment. And so, if you imagine people who came into med school since they were a little kid and they wanted to be a surgeon, knowing that surgery residency is very, very tough to get into, very competitive. And pretty much if you don't get into surgery residency, like, what are you going to do?
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know,
My
if
screen's
you
a little
don't,
messed up.
yeah.
It's fine. It's just a little laggy. There you go. Okay. Keep going.
Um, and so, the competition that you see when you're trying to apply to med school, I think some of that is still there when you're applying into residency. Unfortunately, some of the bad attitudes, um, which I think comes out just because people are very competitive in nature. There's only so many residency spots, and everybody wants, the top spots. Like there can only be so many plastic surgeons in the world. There can only be so many dermatologists. But everybody knows that like those are competitive spots that like a lot of people want. Um,
Maybe
well,
maybe a term to describe it. Is it like very cutthroat where, everyone's trying to just outcompete each other? It's just kind of the
yeah,
environment you're describing. That's why there's so much negativity in that
yeah,
case.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Okay, that makes
Um,
sense.
and so
Unfortunately.
yeah, it is very unfortunate. And you know, medicine is very tied into, academia. Like, you know, your caliber as a doctor, I think, at least when you're in med school, the way you look at it is how much, how high your step score is, how much publications you got, how much extracurriculars, basically like how outstanding of an applicant are you to get into residency is basically tied to how good of a doctor you are going to be when you finish. And you know there's probably some truth to it, but not a whole lot. I don't think.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of pressure. I'm glad I didn't go to med school. But anyways,
yeah.
I wonder if I'm going to run out of time because I'm going to try to aim for an hour. We do have a lot more time yet, but I feel as though I'm probably not going to be able to dive into your residency experiences because I'm curious about your medical school experiences because I don't know if I even recall talking to you about your your medical school experiences. Because what were the years you were in medical school now?
14 to 18.
Okay, that's why. I was in my second year of residency, and then I went into a 4 year project that was really busy. So I was like not talking to anyone. Okay, yeah. So I have no idea how medical school went for you. Can you walk me through some of your experiences in terms of like, was it everything you expected? Did you study all day, every day? Did you not have time for anything? Like, what were your medical school's experience like?
um, so let's see, let's start from the top. So once again, I got into med school and I felt very out of place.
Hmm.
That was my first thought. I had been out of school now for, so let's see, I graduated in 2011. I got into med school in 2014. Right, so that's what, 3 years.
Hmm.
My math checks out. Um, so I had been out of school for 3 years. I don't really, and even I would say in my last year of school, in my last year of undergrad, I didn't really study a whole lot. Uh, you know, um, I had already finished my pre-med courses by that point. Psychology and sociology was winding down. The most time-consuming thing was having to sit in the EMT classes. Um, but otherwise, it wasn't like academically difficult. It was more of a time management thing.
And then you go to med school.
And then I go into med school, and you're just bombarded from day one
Huh.
on just everything. I was warned before going into med school that it's basically drinking out of a fire hose. And that's what it felt like. And on top of just the volume of content that you have to consume and understand, and sometimes I just couldn't even understand it. I just had to resort to memorizing it, and hopefully it'll click in my head at some point later on. Um, and you do that just to get by. But hold on, I lost my train of thought. But so I mean, it was just a lot. It was just a lot to handle. But on top of that, I didn't remember how to study anymore.
Hmm.
And that's something that is very big, at least in the med school that I went to, because there were no lectures at my med school, at least not for the majority of the time.
What do you mean there's no
Um,
lectures?
so, my med school is a big proponent of doing what's called problem-based learning.
Oh, okay,
And
yeah. I know.
and so,
Can you describe it for those who are not familiar with PBLs?
sure. So PBL, problem-based learning, is you basically, for the way that we did it, I don't know if this is how it's supposed to be done or if it's done at other med schools the same way. So we got into a group of 8 med students, and we had a facilitator, one of the faculty members at our school, and they would slowly reveal bits and pieces of a case. And so as you run through the case, you are supposed to keep track of all the things that you are not sure about, um, what's being presented in the case. And then you go home and you're supposed to dig through, textbooks that you own. We're supposed to have textbooks on every single topic in med school. So you dig through those textbooks, you find what's relevant to the case, you read that chapter, and then you come back the next time and you discuss all of those things that you didn't know. So, as a basic example, if the beginning of the case is like, you have a 65-year-old black male who comes in with, crushing substernal chest pain, that could be the first sentence. Okay, well, now you got to go into a textbook about, cardiothoracic anatomy. What the hell is a substernal chest pain? What's substernal?
Hmm.
What is actually the chest? Like, where does that, what are the boundaries of the chest? Simple shit like that. But then you have to go into the physiology textbook. Well, why does this person? How does the heart work? Why does this person have chest pain? Or maybe it's the lungs, or maybe it's like a million other things that's in the chest cavity. Um, and then you have to go look at the pathology textbook. Well, what can go wrong? What's happening? And then somewhere in there, we also learn about just random other facts like demographics, epidemiology. Why is it significant that they said that this person was 65 years old? Why is it significant that they said this person was black? What's so significant about the fact that this person was a male as opposed to a female? So things like that. And so you have to go and learn all on your own, how to run through a case.
S-
And that's how you get taught all the information in med school.
Okay,
Um,
three comments, and I'm gonna try to. Hopefully, I can remember them. The first comment is that we have something from Ishan. It'd be great to like reflect with Ishan some of our undergrad experiences. But he says I can attest to the no study life. I don't even know what I feel as though Ishan's probably one of the individuals that I haven't caught up with in so long, especially like post undergrad. So that's one thing. So that's his comments. The second thing is like I'm thinking about how you went from not being in school for 3 years and going to a PBL based learning that seems so unstructured in the sense that you probably need a lot of motivation to do well in that situation already, but you came from a situation where you weren't in school, so you weren't in that study mindset. So I'm curious as though was this completely unstructured? There was probably some guidance as to like what textbooks to read, what chapters maybe, or no?
yeah.
Okay.
They're in the beginning, the facilitators or the faculty members, whatever you want to talk about, are a little bit more hands-on. Um, so they'll kind of tell you like, oh, like flip through your physiology textbook. There's a chapter there on cardiac stuff, or like, muscle physiology, or whatever the case may be. And that's kind of like a, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, go read that chapter, come back and talk about it. And then over time, you kind of do that on your own. Um, and so that's kind of how it is. But also in the beginning of our med school, we had a crash course. I think it was 8 weeks of structured lecture
Mm,
for anatomy.
okay, that's
And
helpful.
so, yeah, so that's helpful. So that's about as much structure as we're going to get in my med school. Um,
So,
mo-
uh,
Most of the other stuff is all you just learn it on your own.
okay. So then, what are some of the other experiences that you felt in med school? Like, how did that make you feel? Did you just feel like you never had enough time to study? Did you feel lost throughout med school? Like, what?
Oh, absolutely. I remember before going into med school, my roommate, um, who was 1 year older than me, and who we also went to undergrad with, um, he told me, straight up from the start, like, don't compare yourself to other people. Like that's one of the most important things. Like, you, it's going to be hard because you want to look around, you want to like kind of gauge where your progress is by looking at everybody else. Don't do it. It won't work. Because other people, there's people that are freaking brilliant in med school. They can look at something and they have photographic memory. They read a textbook, they know what page and what paragraph and what section it's on, and they'll
Mm,
quote it. And for me, that's not the case. For most people, that's not the case. And so if you're going to compare yourself, you're just always going to be behind. And there's no point in doing that, even though it's really hard not to, because you know you do the best that you can, you know, and to expend any mental energy focusing on how far behind you are doesn't help,
okay,
you know.
makes sense.
Um,
Can I ask you, what were, it's kind of a related question. The two questions going through my mind is one, what were some of the most difficult times in med school, be it the content itself, or like you just stressing out over med school plus other things? And then the second part of that question is like, how did you actually get through med school? What were some of the strategies you used to keep yourself, sane and able to stay motivated?
okay, so let me see. So your first question is about, what
The,
was the toughest times
yep.
and the things that I had to juggle. Um, so honestly, before I got into med school, I had already known that I needed to probably cut out a lot of things in life.
Mm,
Um,
like me. You cut me out.
Unfortunately,
Yeah. Okay, you got it.
I mean, we had a lot of friends in college.
Uh,
We were involved in a lot of things, and I stayed in Florida after. I went to college in Florida, stayed in Florida after college. A lot of those friends are still there, still around. I mean, and it got to a point where I was like, I'm not focusing enough on getting into med school. I needed to make some changes in my life. And so by the time I got into med school, I think I had already kind of trimmed out a lot of things in my life. And it's very unfortunate, but it's one of those things where it's like, what's more important? Is it, is it keeping up with all my friends who, hopefully they can understand that I need to focus on my future, or is my future more important? Um, and so balancing that was difficult in the beginning, but I wouldn't say it's the most difficult. What really was difficult, for me the most was, um, taking care of myself, which I think is still a problem. You
can you
know,
elaborate? What do you mean by taking care of
yeah,
yourself?
and so like getting enough sleep, eating right,
Mm,
attending to your normal routines, making sure that you're staying sane. Because the mentality in med school is always like, well, at least for me, was study, study, study. Um, even though I try not to focus too much on it, but there always that lingering like, you got to do this because it's all going to come down to step one. You got to do this and you're behind. And you just got to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And it's easy to like keep getting into that mindset. Eventually you get really used to the fact that you're studying for, 8, 10, 12 hours a day.
Hmm.
And it becomes almost like comfortable, like once you get into the habit of doing that. And at least for me, it was kind of easy to forget to eat or forget to shower or, like, oh my God, like I've spent all this time and now I need to go to sleep because like it's dark outside. I haven't done anything today besides study. Um, and, my friends and I in med school talked about this a lot. Like a lot of them had like certain days that they set aside where they wouldn't study. Like they would say from this on Saturday from like 8 a.m. to like 5 p.m., no studying, no talking about med school. I can, do my laundry, go for a run, and do whatever else I want, talk to my parents, catch up with friends. We had to set aside those times. And so that was really tough. And especially one of the moments that I remember in particular was, I think it was the end of first year, the beginning of second year. We were learning neuroanatomy, and my friends all know this. I was getting sick all the time during this time period. I don't know what it was. I think now that I realize it, I was probably developing a cat allergy, and one of the places that I studied in always had a cat,
Hmm.
and so I get the sniffles. I wouldn't really think much of it, and then 2 weeks later, I'd develop a cold because my nose is stuffed. And that would just keep repeating over and over and over again.
That sucks.
Yeah,
Especially.
and so there were moments where I was getting sick so much that I was tired and sleeping all day. And I remember one of my friends came up to me one day. He's like, "Dude, we've noticed that you're not well, and you're sleeping a lot. But if you don't study, this is like one of the hardest blocks that we have. Like you need to study. You need to stop sleeping so much. I know you want to. I know you're sick, but you need to start. You need to get up. You need to get your ass up. You need to study this stuff. Like you're gonna fail." And so I had to. Unfortunately, I had to choose between my health or studying for med school. Uh, I passed, you know, but that was kind of that was really difficult to juggle for me personally. Not everyone has the same struggles that I do, but that was one of them.
Would you say that is like the most difficult time you had in med school? Like that particular part?
At least when it comes to like the preclinical years, which are the first 2 years, which is where you do all the book work, that was tough. Um, third and fourth year, when you're in the hospital, you're in the clinic, you're doing clinical stuff. It's a different set of challenges. I mean, it's a challenge of working for 8, 12 hours a day or more sometimes, and then having to come home and study the material. Where do you find the time to do that?
Yeah, I was just thinking. We're probably gonna wrap it up in a few minutes and leave everyone with the cliffhanger. We're not gonna finish your med school story here, but I was just thinking about when I shadowed one of our fraternity brothers and lived with them and three other med students who were in their third year, where we all were doing our I was on rotations and they were too at the same hospital. And I remember shadowing one of my friends or yeah, one of my friends. He was on his surgery rotation and it was a 24-hour shift. And I think I did 12 hours of it. I was like, "Yo, I need to go home."
This was in Pensacola, right?
Oh, you remember? Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Because I also ended up rotating at that same hospital, and so I also did those 24-hour trauma surgery shifts.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
That's vaguely in my mind, but I just, it was so hard to fathom because I remember being there for 12 hours. I was on trauma surgery. I came home. I slept. When I woke up is when he came back. And I was like, this is insane.
it
Like the
is.
stuff that you guys go through. So it's definitely a different set of stressors. And then we'll get into that next time because I want to actually spend some time to talk about it instead of you said read the comment. Um, Yeah, so you, I'm not gonna say that on YouTube. Anyways, Ishan's comment. I don't know if they're gonna like flag me or something, but yeah. So we're kind of end the interview here. This is kind of interesting because I don't think I've ever talked to you much about your med school experiences. So it's good to like kind of catch up and talk about what you went through in med school. But thanks for being here with me today, Andrew, on a Wednesday in the middle of the day. We could be outside right now.
It is.
Social distancing, of course, but
It's raining over here. It's like a
oh, is
hurricane
it?
going through. So
Oh, it's nice and sunny over here. But any last minute words, or maybe like you can offer like a tip to those individuals between college and med school?
so I've touched on this a lot because I think this is kind of like the running theme of my mentality going through this ordeal, so to speak. And we've talked about this too, whether or not we've wanted to make kind of a video series out of this is, what non-traditional average students need to do to get into med school. And we touched on that a little bit, especially with what was it with Chris talking about SDN. Um, you know, you look at those people and you're just like, God, I'm never going to be like them.
Hmm.
How can I ever be a doctor? But it's like there's a lot of different pathways to becoming a doctor, and you don't have to be that to be a doctor, and you're not any less of a doctor if you don't do that stuff. Um, and so that's why I thought it was always kind of interesting. It would be an interesting thing. I'm sure it's already been done, but if we wanted to possibly just talk about what it's like for typical average college students who are interested in medical school, like what they can do, what are their chances, what is the process for them and the struggles that they'll face going into med school. Because uh, I think I'm fairly average in terms of my stats and my intelligence and things like that. And I made it through med school. Um, so, you know,
Is that your brother, Edward Chu?
that is my brother.
He has a question. I'll read the question here.
All right.
I do think that'd be a great topic, and maybe before we read the final question, there is the amount of times you said doctored made me think of the post on subtle Asian dating. For those who are not familiar with it, we actually will have Andrew back on a live stream on a different channel to talk about dating as a doctor. So, if those for those of you interested in that, stay tuned. I'll post a link to that interview in the future. So, Ed's question: would you go through this process again, and if you would do anything differently? It's a deep question.
Um, I don't know if I would do this process again.
Hmm.
Um, I I think about that a lot. I'm not really sure what the right answer to that be. On the one
Okay.
hand, yes, I would because I know that I can, and I know that at the end of the day, I made it. And well, I haven't quite made it all the way through yet, but at this point, it's safe to say that I've made it. Uh,
Keep going.
um, but on the other hand, I know that there are better ways to have gone about this. I didn't, I question sometimes what it is that drove me to be a physician. Did I need to be a physician in order to do what I wanted to do? What because I thought about being a therapist for a really long time. Would I have been better doing that?
Mm.
Or, if I really wanted to be in the medical career, I interact with, for example, like nurse practitioners who are in the psychiatric field, like psychiatric nurse practitioners. Could I have done that? Or PAs, physician assistants. Could I have done that? Or would I have been more well suited for that role? Um,
Do you still think about that? Like, do you still think about other roles that you may have enjoyed pursuing?
I mean, it's fun to think about, but at the end of the day, like it doesn't lead me anywhere. It's just one of those things that it's like, it's one of those,
You can still do it.
yeah, but why would I do that?
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. It's just interesting. So the no comes from if you could have done other things. But okay. Anything else on that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's more. We could spend hours talking about this.
Yeah,
Um,
I think like I mean that is I feel potentially even a topic on its own because I think a lot of people question like what do they want their purpose in life to be? Where do they want their life to go? I think it's a great
yeah.
topic.
And then so the second part of that question is if you would do anything differently. I mean, of course, like there's always things that I could have done differently. Should I have gone to DO school? Should I have been more aggressive in my application? Should I have been more aggressive in my residency application? Should I have done more to make myself a better applicant for residency? Um, but again, I look at those things and I wonder, what is it like? Why do I think those things? Is it because I'm not the prototypical, you know, physician? Because I'm not an MD, because I'm not someone with 12 publications under my belt and going to an academic center for residency that's well known. Uh, does that, I sometimes wonder, does that make me any less of a physician compared to those people who did do those things? Especially if those are the people that you always hear about on Student Doctor Network, or those are the people that you hear about that are like, other YouTube personalities or, other social media presence. Like most of the doctors that you hear about, you know, in the news, online, these are, Stanford, Harvard, or, shout out to, my brother, Mount Sinai, uh, people at very prestigious institutions. And I am not one of those people. Um, could I have been? I don't know. Could I have done things differently to make myself one of those people? I'm not sure. Um, and so that's one of those things where, you'll always think about it, but at the end of the day, I'm more or less happy with where I'm at. Um, but that's one of those things that, I think for the next generation of doctors that are going to be coming up, maybe that's something that they should know about. It's something that I'm sure that's something that everyone kind of struggles with. And I don't really know if they should, because again, I don't think any of what I've done or any of my colleagues at the residency program that I'm at, they're not any less of a doctor than people who went to big name prestigious university programs. We all learned the same material. We all passed our steps. We're all qualified to be physicians. Yeah, maybe some more qualified than others, but you know, um, and so I mean, I'm just rambling, but that's something that I've always thought would be interesting to kind of share with people, rather than the typical, student doctor network posting your 12
Yeah,
page long CVs. Um,
the non-traditional path.
Non-traditional students, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think it'll be a great topic to touch on someday because, like you said, there's probably a lot of students that go through that as well. So we're kind of wrap this up. We were kind of trying to wrap it up already, but this got deep all of a sudden, and it worked out well because your brother just said you're still single. So for the ladies out there, Andrew is still single. He's a doctor. He's a very smart and humble doctor. So very good catch there. But okay, we'll wrap this up. Thanks again for your time, Andrew. Again, I'll post the links to Andrew's dating interview in the description of the this video afterwards, and so you can tune in for that. Thanks, you guys, for tuning in. Thanks, Andrew, for coming on, and we will see you guys next time.
All right, thank you. Take
All right,
care.
and it's done.